So I want you to picture walking into your boss's office for your annual review.
Oh, always a stressful scenario.
Right. You're probably sweating a little bit. You sit down, the door clicks shut, and your boss slides a piece of paper across the desk.
Okay.
And they give you some genuinely fantastic news. You're getting a raise.
Love to hear that.
Yeah, and it's not just a tiny bump. It's actually the biggest percentage increase you've seen in 3 years.
Wow, okay, so you're instantly mentally spending it.
Exactly. Your mind immediately starts allocating those extra dollars. You're thinking, maybe this covers that crazy spike in your grocery bill, or it finally takes the edge off those insane heating costs for the winter.
Right, you're breathing a sigh of relief.
Totally. But before you can even reach out to shake their hand and say thank you, the head of HR leans forward.
There's always a catch.
Always.
Yeah.
And they casually add this massive caveat. They tell you, like, hey, the raise is real, but our company's main bank account is draining way faster than we thought. Yeah, they're burning through cash, and they might actually start bouncing your paychecks entirely in just a few short years.
That's just the ultimate form of financial whiplash.
It really is.
You're basically being handed a bucket to bail out the water,
Yeah.
but at the same time, they're telling you the ship has this massive accelerating leak in the hull.
Exactly.
You have to process this immediate, tangible relief. At the exact same moment, you're handed a terrifying long-term structural warning.
And the crazy thing is, that structural warning, it's not just some hypothetical corporate scenario I made up.
No, it's very real.
It's the exact literal paradox facing roughly 75 million Americans right now, people who rely on Social Security.
Yeah.
So welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a huge stack of data today, right?
We really are. A ton of reports.
Yeah, we're cross-referencing everything from the government's latest trust fund projections and macroeconomic inflation data to, on-the-ground advocacy reports detailing what seniors are actually experiencing at the pharmacy counter.
Which is often very different from the macroeconomic data.
Totally. So our mission today is figure out exactly what this collision of math means for you, the average retiree or future retiree. We are unpacking the impending 2027 Social Security Cost of Living Adjustment, the OLA.
Right, the famous CCLA.
And we are going to separate the immediate relief of that coming raise from the massive structural alarms that are just blaring in the background. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, because looking at these diverging realities simultaneously is honestly the only way to actually understand the current economic landscape for retirees.
Right.
If you just scan the financial headlines on your phone about the projected KCOA increase, the narrative looks pretty optimistic.
Like, hey, we're getting a raise.
Exactly. The system is adjusting for inflation, seniors are getting more money.
Sure.
But if you only read the think tank reports about the trust fund running dry...
And it feels like the sky is falling.
Exactly. The narrative is totally catastrophic. The actual lived experience of those 75 million people is caught right in the friction between those two extremes.
So we need to start with the immediate horizon, the raise itself.
The good news part.
Right, the short-term win. Right now, the projections for the 2027 COLA are indicating the largest increase we've seen in 3 years.
Which is significant.
It really is. The early models are clustering right around a 3.6 to 3.8% jump.
Okay.
And just to put that in perspective for everyone, we saw a 2.5% bump for 2025 and a 2.8% bump for 2026. So pushing up near 4% is a very noticeable step up.
It's a real jump, yeah.
But before we look at how that money actually gets spent or the terrifying 2030s deadlines, we need to understand the machinery behind this number.
The actual gears turning.
Yeah, because the COLA isn't just like a political favor handed out by whoever happens to be sitting in Washington at the time.
No, it's a strictly mathematical formula now. But it's kind of wild to reflect on the fact that for decades it was entirely political.
Right, I was reading about that.
Yeah, to really appreciate the mechanics of this 3.6 to 3.8% projection, you have to look back to the environment of 1975.
It's honestly wild to think that before 1975 this wasn't automated at all.
Not at all.
Retirees literally had to wait for Congress to pass a bespoke law, basically from scratch, just to keep their benefits in line with inflation.
Yeah, the inefficiency of that old system is just staggering when you view it through a modern economic lens.
I can't even imagine.
You basically had a system of clunky, ad hoc congressional votes in years where inflation was rapidly eating away at the purchasing power of seniors.
Which was a huge issue in the 70s.
A massive crisis in the 1970s. Those retirees just had to wait for politicians to negotiate, draft a bill, argue over the percentages, and finally pass legislation to grant an increase.
And if Congress was deadlocked on other issues, which, let's be honest, happens a lot, or if it simply wasn't an election year where politicians felt the pressure to win over the senior vote, that adjustment might just not happen.
Exactly. It would just stall out.
And the purchasing power of that monthly check would just quietly erode while politicians argued on TV.
Which meant millions of seniors were sliding backward into poverty in real time, just waiting for a legislative miracle.
Wow.
So in 1975, Congress fundamentally altered the DNA of the program by creating the automatic cost of living adjustment.
The COLA.
Right. The entire philosophy was to remove the political theater.
Make it objective.
Exactly. They wanted to tie the benefit increase strictly to objective economic data, putting the preservation of purchasing power on autopilot.
And by 1977, they locked in the specific data point they were going to use to steer that autopilot.
Yep, the metric.
And this is a term that shows up in literally every single source we reviewed today. The Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers.
The CPI-W.
Right, the CPI-W. Now, we're all pretty used to hearing about the standard CPI when the evening news talks about general inflation, but the government deliberately chose this highly specific subset to calculate the Social Security COLA.
They chose the CPI-W, and they also instituted a highly rigid timeline for when they measure it.
Okay, this is where it gets interesting.
This is where the math gets very granular. But it's essential for understanding why these 2027 projections are bouncing around so much right now.
Right.
The official COLA that determines a retiree's raise for the entire following year is not based on the full 12 months of inflation.
Wait, really? It's not a yearly average?
No, it's a snapshot. It is specifically measured by comparing the CPI-W from the third quarter of the current year.
So that's July, August, and September.
Exactly. They compare that specific window to the exact same third quarter period of the previous year.
So as we're sitting here talking right now, the Bureau of Labor Statistics is actively out in the field gathering that critical third quarter data.
They are running the numbers as we speak.
And the official number won't actually be locked in, verified, and announced by the Social Security Administration until mid-October.
Right. It's always an October reveal.
That means every single headline we are seeing right now is basically an educated guess based on leading indicators.
It's all forecasting.
Over the last decade, the COLA has averaged roughly 3.1%. Now we are tracking noticeably higher. But when you line up the estimates from different organizations in our sources, the variance is fascinating.
It really is. Everyone have a slightly different take.
Yeah. AARP's Public Policy Institute is playing it relatively conservative. Their models are projecting a 3.6% increase.
Okay.
Meanwhile, the Senior Citizens League TSCL has been holding totally steady at 3.8% for 2 consecutive months.
Now, a gap of 0.2% might seem negligible in the abstract.
Like pennies, right?
Right. But when you apply it to a macroeconomic scale involving trillions of dollars in obligations, it represents a massive divergence in how these organizations are weighting the incoming data.
For sure.
TSCL's projection of 3.8% is a full percentage point higher than the 2.8% COLA the system paid out in 2026.
But the most revealing data point in our whole stack of sources comes from independent analyst Mary Johnson.
Oh, her data is fascinating.
It is. She currently has her estimate sitting right in the middle at 3.7%. But what makes her model so compelling to look at is the volatility.
The huge swings.
Yes. Just a month prior to locking in that 3.7% projection, her model was forecasting a massive 4.7% COLA.
A full point higher.
Her projection plummeted a full percentage point in a matter of weeks. That feels like a brutal financial roller coaster for any senior trying to budget for the coming year.
Oh, absolutely.
I really want to dig into the mechanics of that drop. Why are we seeing such violent swings from month to month when these experts are all just trying to predict this specific third quarter window?
What's fascinating here is that the volatility in those independent models exposes how incredibly sensitive the CPI-W is to micro shifts in global commodity markets.
Okay, break that down.
Analysts like Mary Johnson are attempting to forecast the July, August, and September window based on the rolling data they receive in the spring and early summer.
So they're extrapolating.
Exactly. And that dramatic drop you highlighted, from 4.7% down to 3.7%, was driven almost entirely by the June inflation data releases.
Okay, so let's isolate June. What specifically happened in the global economy that caused the leading indicators for American retirees to just drop so sharply?
Energy prices.
Yeah.
They cooled off at a much faster rate than the models anticipated.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Because the official Social Security number is entirely dependent on that Q3 snapshot, independent analysts are completely at the mercy of month-to-month swings in foundational commodities.
Like gas prices.
We were talking about gasoline at the pump, heating oil, and electricity rates. When there was a noticeable dip in the price of crude oil in June, the projection models immediately adjusted their trajectory downward.
Wow. So if there's a sudden supply chain disruption in August, or say a spike in fuel costs due to some geopolitical tension somewhere,
Those models will whip right back up.
it's essentially trying to predict the final score of a baseball game in the sixth inning based on the current wind speed.
That's a great way to put it.
It gives you a baseline idea, but a sudden gust can completely change the trajectory of the ball before the final out.
That captures the uncertainty perfectly. Until the Bureau of Labor Statistics firmly closes the books on September and finalizes the arithmetic, every projection is vulnerable to the whims of the global energy and commodities markets.
That's so stressful if you're living on a fixed income.
Incredibly stressful.
Let's pull this down from the macroeconomic clouds for a second and translate these percentages. Whether we land at AARP's 3.6% or TSCL's 3.8% into the actual dollars showing up in a retiree's bank account.
The real-world impact.
Right. Because a senior in Ohio isn't paying for their groceries with a percentage point. They need hard currency.
Exactly. So if we run the math on the more optimistic end of the spectrum, using TSCL's 3.8% projection, the average retiree benefit would rise by roughly $73.62 a month.
Okay, so let's round that to $74.
Right. That takes the baseline average monthly check from about $1,937 up to just over $2,011.
Now, crossing that $2,000 psychological threshold for the average check is a pretty significant milestone.
It is. It really is. And if you run the calculation using the Social Security Administration's own statistical snapshot from May, which utilized a slightly higher baseline average of roughly $2,082.
Right, slightly higher starting point.
A 3.8% bump there yields a monthly gain closer to $79.
Okay. And even if we look at AARP's more conservative model of 3.6%, we are still looking at adding about $75 to a roughly $2,084 check.
Right.
So across the board, regardless of which organizational model ends up being perfectly accurate in October, the consensus is clear. We are talking about an extra $75 to $80 a month for an individual retiree.
And the impact scales up significantly when you look at households.
Oh, sure, if you have two people.
Right. For married couples where both individuals are receiving an average benefit, we are looking at a combined monthly gain approaching $150 to $160.
That's a car payment for some people.
Yeah. When you annualize that, it is nearly $2,000 in additional household income for the year.
Which, on the surface, sounds undeniably positive. I mean, nobody is going to turn down an extra $160 a month.
Nobody.
But this is where we pivot to Section 2 of our deep dive. If we cross-reference that theoretical windfall with the on-the-ground data from these exact same advocacy groups, we hit a massive contradiction.
A huge reality check.
Yes. If seniors are getting an extra $75 to $160 a month, why does TSCL's executive director report that more than half of seniors already say they can't afford basic living standards?
It doesn't seem to make sense.
Right. Even before we touch the long-term solvency crisis of the trust fund, there is an immediate, glaring disconnect here. A 3.8% raise is mathematically a victory on paper, but the reality on the ground feels completely different.
You are hitting on the fundamental structural flaw in how the United States government measures inflation for retirees.
The hidden squeeze.
Yes, the hidden squeeze. And the origin of that squeeze comes right back to the acronym we discussed earlier, the CPI-W.
Right, the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers.
I really want you to focus on the specific words in that title. Urban wage earners and clerical workers.
Right.
When the government designed this metric, they built it to track the spending habits of younger working-age populations.
Like people in their 30s and 40s.
Exactly. The basket of goods that the Bureau of Labor Statistics uses to calculate the CPI-W includes a heavy emphasis on things like daily commuting costs, new electronics, apparel, and eating out at restaurants.
Okay, so wait. Using the CPI-W to measure a senior's inflation is basically like using a thermometer in the living room to figure out if the oven is hot enough to bake bread.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize the disconnect.
It's measuring a temperature, sure, but it is entirely the wrong room. It is meticulously measuring the fluctuating price of laptops, business casual apparel, and commuting gas. But it is completely missing the inferno happening in the kitchen where the senior actually lives.
Yes. Think about the daily spending basket of an 82-year-old retiree.
Right, they aren't buying laptops.
They are not commuting to an office 5 days a week. They are rarely purchasing the latest consumer electronics or trendy clothes. Their fixed monthly budget is disproportionately allocated toward bare necessities.
Survival stuff.
Exactly. Specifically, their wealth is absorbed by groceries, residential energy costs to heat and cool their homes, and most crucially, healthcare.
And the structural trap here, and the sources make this so clear, is that those specific necessities, food, power, and medicine, are rising in cost at a significantly faster rate than the rest of the broader generalized economy.
That's the kicker. The CPI-W captures a generalized blended inflation rate of, say, 3.8%, but it drastically underweighs the very items that are suffocating retirees.
Oh, wow.
When the price of ground beef, fresh produce, and heating oil jumps by 6 or 7%, a 3.8% COLA doesn't cover the spread.
So getting a 3.8% raise on paper doesn't actually help at all if your personal real-world cost of living just went up by 5 or 6%, because literally all your money goes to the grocery store and the utility company.
You're losing ground.
You are mathematically losing ground while technically receiving a raise. That's infuriating.
That is the insidious nature of using the CPI-W for seniors. The purchasing power of that Social Security check is steadily, quietly eroding year after year, even in years with historically high CKLAs.
Yeah.
And that erosion is amplified by the most significant hidden deduction of all, a cost that isn't even fully captured by those grocery or utility bills.
Healthcare.
Yeah.
The sources we are reviewing dedicate significant space to the healthcare burden, and this is where the math gets genuinely brutal for the average retiree. I want to dissect these specific hidden deductions because I think the general public often operates under a massive misconception here.
It definitely do.
Most younger people think, oh, seniors have Medicare, their healthcare is just covered by the government. They do not realize the aggressive toll it takes on their monthly cash flow.
Medicare is an absolute lifeline, obviously, but it is far from free, and the way it is billed directly impacts the CLA. Well, the first layer of this is Medicare Part B premiums. Part B is the coverage for essential things like doctor's visits, preventative care, and outpatient services.
The everyday medical stuff.
Right. The critical mechanism here, and this is the thing that catches so many new retirees off guard, is that Medicare Part B premiums are deducted directly from a retiree's Social Security check before the money ever hits their bank account.
Wow. It never even touches their hands.
Exactly. So let's run a realistic scenario based on the numbers we talked about. The government announces a COLA that theoretically gives you an extra $75 a month.
Okay, so you budget for that $75.
Right. But simultaneously, the government announces that Medicare Part B premiums are increasing by $25 a month for the new year.
Oh, I see where this is going.
That $25 is skimmed right off the top. You only actually see a $50 increase in your direct deposit.
That's brutal. The government is essentially giving you a raise with one hand and immediately clawing back a third of it with the other to cover the rising systemic costs of healthcare.
It operates like an invisible tax on the raise itself.
Right.
But the advocacy reports in our stack highlight a metric on the horizon for 2027 that is even more punishing than those baseline premium increases.
Yeah, I saw this in the notes. They are pointing directly at the Medicare catastrophic out-of-pocket threshold.
Yes.
Explain this, because it's a highly specific, highly consequential financial cap.
To explain how it works, when a senior requires prescription drugs, they pay out of pocket up to a certain financial threshold.
Like a deductible.
Right. Once their personal spending hits that designated ceiling, the catastrophic coverage phase kicks in, and Medicare assumes the vast majority of the remaining medication costs for the year.
Okay, so it is the safety net designed to prevent a single severe illness, like cancer or something, from completely bankrupting a retiree.
Precisely. In 2026, the data shows that threshold was set at $2,100.
Okay, meaning once a senior scraped together $2,100 of their own money for medications, the safety net deployed and covered the rest.
But for 2027, that catastrophic threshold is scheduled for a massive upward adjustment.
Massive.
It is jumping from $2,100 to $2,400.
Wow. That is a direct $300 hit to the most vulnerable seniors.
Yes. independent of the CLA entirely.
Let's synthesize this math for a second because it paints a really, really bleak picture of that initial optimistic headline we started with.
It changes the whole narrative.
Let's say an individual's 3.8% CLA gives them roughly $900 in extra gross income for the entire year, right? Which is about $75 a month times 12.
Okay, $900.
But their out-of-pocket drug exposure just increased by $300 because of that threshold jump. And their baseline Part B premiums went up, and their grocery bill is compounding at a faster rate than the broader economy.
It's all gone.
That entire $900 raise just vanishes. It is a total mirage.
It is worse than a mirage. It is an illusion of stability that masks actual financial decline. When advocacy groups link the eroding purchasing power of the CLA directly to retiree hardship, this is the exact arithmetic they are talking about.
Right.
When more than half of the seniors surveyed by TSCL report they cannot afford basic necessities, they are not complaining about abstract economic theories or slightly smaller profit margins.
No, they're looking at their checkbook.
They are staring at a ledger where the incoming government-adjusted math simply does not cover the outgoing real-world reality of keeping the heat on and paying for insulin.
Yeah. So we have established that the KLA, despite being historically robust right now, is essentially just a Band-Aid.
A very thin Band-Aid.
It is desperately trying to cover the localized, specific inflation bleeding out of seniors' budgets, and it is largely failing to keep pace. But, and this is the big pivot, the TKLA forces the government to write larger checks to those seniors every single month.
Right.
Because we operate in a system where those larger checks rely on broader funding mechanisms, that immediate relief is acting like a vacuum on the reserve funds.
The money has to come from somewhere.
Right. Let's look at exactly how fast that vacuum is running, because we need to shift our focus to the June 2026 Trustees Report. The short-term math of a senior's monthly budget is stressful, sure, but the long-term structural math of the program is terrifying.
We are pivoting from the microeconomics of the grocery store to the macroeconomics of national solvency.
Exactly.
And the June 2026 Board of Trustees report delivered a reality check that sent shockwaves through both financial markets and advocacy groups alike.
I was looking at the executive summary of the Trustees Report, and the timeline here is what immediately alarmed me. They're looking specifically at the Retirement Trust Fund, the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund.
Yep, the OESI.
And they have moved the depletion date up a full year to the fourth quarter of 2032.
Which is shockingly close.
That is only 6 years out from the timeline we are currently analyzing.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, losing a full 12 months of runway in a single annual projection update is a staggering acceleration for a program of this magnitude.
I mean, these are usually slow-moving ships, right?
It's exactly. Previous models comfortably placed the depletion date in 2033 or even 2034. By pulling it forward to late 2032, the window for Congress to implement any sort of gradual, painless legislative fix has basically slammed shut.
It goes right back to the scenario we started the show with. The boss gives you a raise, but the HR department informs you the corporate accounts are bleeding out in 6 years.
It's the exact same dynamic.
But I want to pause here and mandate some extreme clarity regarding the terminology used in these government reports.
Please do, because it gets so distorted.
When the media aggregates these reports, they use words that induce absolute panic. You hear phrases like, the trust fund is depleted, Social Security is running dry, or the system is insolvent.
Right, apocalypse language.
The average worker hears those words and assumes the fund drops to absolute zero. They assume the entire apparatus goes bankrupt and the checks simply stop arriving in Q4 of 2032.
Which is completely false.
Right. We need to dissect this mechanism. What does depletion actually mean in the context of the Trustees Report?
To understand depletion, you have to completely discard the way most people visualize Social Security. The vast majority of Americans picture a giant subterranean vault in Washington, D.C.
Like a Scrooge McDuck vault.
Exactly. Where the government takes the FICA taxes out of your weekly paycheck, puts them in a little lockbox with your name on it, and lets it gather dust until you turn 67.
Which would be nice, but
That is not how it works at all. Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system. The taxes collected from the paychecks of current workers this morning are immediately routed to pay the benefits of current retirees this afternoon.
so the money flows from my payroll deduction straight out to my grandfather's benefit check.
In real time.
It is a river of revenue, not a static pond.
Precisely. Now, for several decades, the demographics of the United States created a highly favorable ratio. You had a massive generation of baby boomers in their prime working years paying into the system, supporting a relatively smaller generation of retirees.
Okay, lots of workers, fewer retirees.
Right. The system was collecting significantly more in tax revenue than it was legally obligated to pay out in benefits.
So what happens to all that excess cash? Does it just sit there?
No, by law, that surplus cannot just sit in cash. It is deposited into the Social Security Trust Fund, where it is converted into special issue U.S. Treasury bonds.
Okay, so it's invested.
Yes, and those bonds earn interest. You can think of the trust fund as the ultimate systemic backup savings account.
Got it.
But over the last decade, the demographic ratio has inverted. The baby boomers are retiring in massive waves. Life expectancy overall has increased, meaning people draw benefits for longer, and birth rates have declined.
Meaning there are fewer young workers entering that taxable payroll river you mentioned.
The math flips completely. The system is now legally obligated to pay out more in monthly benefits than it collects in daily payroll taxes.
So, to honor their obligations and ensure every retiree gets 100% of their scheduled check today, the government is forced to dip into that trust fund.
Exactly. They're cashing in those treasury bonds to make up the monthly shortfall.
Okay, I follow the plumbing of the system now. So when the trustees sound the alarm and state the fund will be depleted in Q4 of 2032, they are not saying the Social Security Administration ceases to exist.
Not at all.
They are saying the backup savings account, that stockpile of treasury bonds, finally hits zero. But the underlying pay-as-you-go engine is still running. The current workforce is still getting taxed every single Friday.
That is the crucial distinction. The income stream does not stop. The backup savings account is empty, but the daily deposits from millions of working Americans continue to flow into the system.
Right.
However, once that reserve fund is gone, the law strictly prohibits the program from borrowing money to cover the gap. The program can only distribute what it organically collects in taxes that week.
Oh.
And if we look at the mathematical projections for 2032, the anticipated tax revenue would only be sufficient to cover roughly 78% of the promised benefits.
78%.
Yes.
So the benefits do not vanish entirely, but every single retiree in the system faces an automatic, brutal haircut to their livelihood.
Immediate reduction.
To understand the tangible reality of that, our sources cite some analysis from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget.
Right, the CRFB.
They estimate that a sudden 22% shortfall would translate to average monthly benefit cuts of near $500 for retirees.
$500 a month, just gone.
And they note that depending on state-level demographics and local cost of living variables, those cuts would feel exponentially worse in 29 specific states.
It would be devastating.
A $500 monthly reduction would be catastrophic. I mean, we just spent the first half of this deep dive establishing that a $75 raise barely keeps seniors afloat with inflation.
Exactly.
Stripping $500 out of their budget overnight would fundamentally alter the landscape of poverty in the United States.
It would trigger an unprecedented socioeconomic crisis. Millions of seniors would be instantly pushed beneath the poverty line. They would be unable to afford housing, let alone catastrophic healthcare costs.
Which brings us to the most pressing analytical question of this entire report. The why.
How did we get here so fast?
Right. Why did the math degrade so rapidly? Why did this catastrophic depletion date suddenly jump forward an entire year in the newest modeling?
We have to look at the intersection of tax policy and systemic funding here.
Okay.
According to detailed analysis from the Bipartisan Policy Center, a significant portion of this accelerated timeline is directly attributable to recent legislation. Specifically, the cascading effects of the 2025 tax law.
Okay, let's trace the mechanics of this very carefully. We're just looking at the math, not the politics. How does a broad tax law inadvertently shave a whole year off the lifespan of the Social Security Trust Fund?
It fundamentally comes down to revenue streams. Under the structure of the 2025 tax law, the overall income tax liability for many middle-income Social Security beneficiaries was reduced.
Meaning they paid less in taxes.
Right. From the perspective of the individual taxpayer, this was an unalloyed positive as a tax cut. They owed less to the IRS, meaning they kept more of their money in their pockets.
Which sounds great.
But we have to look at how the taxation of benefits is wired into the Social Security system itself.
Wait, I want to clarify that for a listener who might not be retired yet. Social Security benefits themselves are subject to federal income tax?
Yes, depending on your combined income. This was actually implemented in previous reform eras, first in 1983 and expanded in 1993. If your income exceeds certain thresholds, a portion of your Social Security benefits becomes taxable.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
A lot of people don't until they retire. But the critical design feature of that mechanism is where that tax money goes.
Let me guess, it doesn't go to the general IRS fund.
Exactly. The revenue generated from taxing Social Security benefits does not go into the general fund to build roads or fund the military. It's funneled directly back into the Social Security Trust Fund. It is a self-replenishing loop.
Oh, wow. I see the domino effect here.
Yeah, it's pretty clear when you map it out.
It is a direct mathematical cause and effect. The 2025 tax law lowered the income taxes that these specific individuals paid. Because they were paying less tax on their benefits, the system inadvertently starved its own backup savings account.
You nailed it.
The legislative change decreased the inflow of tax revenue, which meant the outflow required to pay current benefits drained the existing reserves a full 12 months faster.
It is an inescapable mathematical reality of how macroeconomic policy shifts impact systemic funding. Lowering taxes on one side of the ledger feels good for the individual, but it results in a massive reduction of revenue for the trust fund on the other side.
Action and reaction.
Exactly. And the reports reveal that it's not just the depletion date that is worsening. The foundational structural math beneath the entire pay-as-you-go engine is degrading.
There's more.
Oh, yeah. The sources highlight a particularly sobering report from J.P. Morgan Asset Management that focuses on a metric arguably more consequential than the 2032 deadline itself.
What could possibly be more consequential than a looming $500 benefit cut?
The sheer compounding size of the hole they have to dig out of.
Okay, explain that.
J.P. Morgan's analysts point out that the program's 75-year funding shortfall, which is the metric actuaries use to gauge long-term health, grew by 16% year over year.
16% in 1 year.
Yes. It escalated from a shortfall of 3.82% of taxable payroll to 4.42%.
Okay, we need to break down taxable payroll into plain English because that is a phrase economists throw around that immediately glazes over a normal person's eyes.
Fair enough.
What does that 4.42% actually represent in the real world?
Taxable payroll is essentially the giant aggregate pool of all the wages, salaries, and tips earned by working Americans throughout the year that are subject to the Social Security tax.
So it is the river of money flowing through the labor market.
Exactly. Right now, workers and employers each pay a 6.2% tax on those earnings, up to a certain income cap. So when the actuaries state that the long-term shortfall has grown to 4.42% of taxable payroll, they are defining the exact size of the fix required.
Meaning the government would need to reach into that river of wages and take a significantly deeper cup of water just to balance the books.
Exactly. It means that if Congress decided they wanted to solve the Social Security crisis for the next 75 years purely by raising taxes, with no benefit cuts whatsoever, they would have to immediately increase the total payroll tax rate by 4.42 percentage points.
That would be a massive, immediate shock to the take-home pay of every working American and the labor costs of every business.
Yes, a huge shock. The alternative, of course, is implementing an equally massive immediate cut to benefits. But the most alarming part of the J.P. Morgan data is not just the size of the number, it is the velocity of the growth.
That 16% jump.
Right. The fact that this shortfall metric grew by 16% in a single calendar year means the structural rot is compounding.
It is exactly like ignoring a foundational crack in your house.
Yes, perfect analogy.
The crack doesn't just sit there statically, the weight of the house makes it widen every single day. So the eventual repair bill, whether that is raising the retirement age, hiking taxes, or altering the QLA formula, is growing exponentially larger and more economically painful for every month that Congress refuses to act.
The longer you wait, the more expensive the fix.
Which leads to the obvious, screaming question. Congress has these trustees reports, they have the J.P. Morgan data, they know the exact quarter in 2032 when the 22% cut hits.
They know it all.
Why the paralysis? Are we just staring blindly over the edge of an unprecedented historical cliff here? Or is there a playbook for how Washington handles this specific type of crisis?
We're undoubtedly facing a crisis of a larger magnitude due to the sheer size of the retiring baby boomer population. But we are not in completely uncharted waters.
Okay, that's slightly comforting.
There's a very clear, very instructive historical precedent for this exact type of legislative brinkmanship. To understand what is likely to happen as we approach 2032, we have to look back at the environment leading up to the 1983 Social Security reforms.
Ah, the Greenspan Commission era, the political dynamic of the early 1980s.
The parallels are striking, though the timeline in 1983 was much, much more compressed. In the early 1980s, the Social Security Trust Fund was not looking at a 6-year runway. They were quite literally months away from being unable to distribute full benefits.
Wow, months.
The crisis was happening right in front of them, in real time. The political pressure on Congress and the Reagan administration was immense. They were facing a hard, undeniable deadline where checks to seniors were going to be slashed right before an election cycle.
And obviously the checks did not stop in 1983. So what was the mechanism of their compromise? How did they maneuver out of that corner?
They did what politicians historically do only when their backs are entirely against the wall and the consequences of inaction mean political suicide.
Which is what?
They compromised in a way that aggressively spread the financial pain across every demographic. The 1983 reforms were a massive bipartisan legislative package resulting from the Greenspan Commission. They didn't rely on a single silver bullet. They tweaked both the inflow of taxes and the outflow of benefits.
So they essentially mandated that everyone had to bleed a little bit to save the patient.
Exactly. On the outflow side, they implemented a gradual increase in the full retirement age, slowly pushing it from 65 to 67 over a period of decades.
Which sneaky, because you don't feel it immediately.
Right. But it meant future retirees would have to wait longer to receive their full promised benefit, effectively reducing the lifetime payout of the system.
And what about the inflow?
On the inflow side, this was the exact moment they introduced the taxation of Social Security benefits for higher income earners that we discussed earlier. They also accelerated previously scheduled increases to the payroll tax rate. They demanded more revenue from current workers while quietly reducing the long-term obligations to future retirees.
So, looking at that precedent, the historical behavioral model suggests that Congress will likely wait until the absolute 11th hour.
As they always do.
They will likely push this right up against the Q4 2032 deadline, maximizing the political theater on cable news, before finally passing a massive hybrid legislative package that combines tax increases with benefit formula adjustments.
That is the overwhelming consensus among financial analysts, institutional investors, and policy experts. The political blowback of allowing tens of millions of seniors to face a sudden 22% cut to their primary lifeline is generally considered untenable for any elected official who wishes to remain in office.
Right. It would be political suicide.
The crisis will force action. However, the critical caveat, as highlighted by that compounding J.P. Morgan data, is that the longer they wait to form that bipartisan commission, the more severe and economically disruptive those hybrid adjustments will have to be.
It's just going to hurt more.
The pain required to fix a 4.42% taxable payroll hole today is massive. The pain required to fix it in 2031 will be generationally defining.
Wow. Okay, we have covered an immense amount of conceptual and mathematical ground in this deep dive today.
I really have.
We started with the granular quarter-by-quarter math of commodity inflation and the CPI-W, and we expanded out into the macroeconomic reality of demographic inversion, tax policy consequences, and trust fund depletion.
A lot to process.
It is. I want to distill all of this complexity into actionable, practical takeaways for the listener who is just sitting there trying to map out their own financial future.
I think the primary takeaway requires the intellectual flexibility to hold two fundamentally conflicting truths at the exact same time.
Okay, what's the first truth?
The first truth is that there is undeniable, tangible short-term relief on the horizon. A projected 3.6 to 3.8% CCOA raise for 2027 represents real liquidity. We're talking about an extra $75 to $80 a month for individuals and up to $160 for households.
Which is real money.
Yes. While it may not fully neutralize the aggressive inflation in healthcare or groceries, it is a vital infusion of cash that will help offset the very real pain seniors are feeling right now.
But that short-term relief is on a violent collision course with long-term structural urgency. The 2032 depletion date is no longer a theoretical model relegated to academic white papers. It is a fast-approaching 6-year window that demands attention.
Absolutely.
But in reviewing the sources from financial institutions like Edward Jones and J.P. Morgan, their core directive to everyday investors is crucial. Do not panic. Panic leads to irrational financial decisions.
Exactly. The actionable advice is to plan with clear-eyed realism. Trust fund depletion does not mean the program evaporates into thin air.
Right, the vault isn't empty.
It means facing a potential reduction to roughly 78% of scheduled benefits if Washington entirely abdicates its responsibility. Therefore, intelligent, resilient retirement planning should not be paralyzed by irrational fears of complete systemic bankruptcy.
So what should people do?
Instead, it must prudently account for the high probability of future benefit adjustments, increased taxation on those benefits, or a shifting retirement age. Plan for a haircut, not a beheading.
Plan for a haircut, not a beheading. I think that perfectly encapsulates the measured approach required here. So what does this all ultimately mean for the architecture of the system? As we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a profound paradox to mull over.
It's a heavy one.
It really is. We spent the first half of the show detailing how the automatic CPI-W was fiercely championed and created in 1975 to protect vulnerable seniors from the ravages of inflation. It was designed as an economic shield.
A protective mechanism.
Right. But consider the macroeconomic feedback loop we have uncovered today. Because higher localized inflation triggers higher automatic CPI-W payouts, it legally requires the Social Security Administration to withdraw vastly more money, significantly faster, from the Reserve Trust Fund to cover those larger checks. Which brings us to a highly uncomfortable structural question. Is it mathematically possible that the very mechanism designed in 1975 to protect retirees, the automatic CLA, is the exact mechanism accelerating the system's structural insolvency today? The heavy iron shield forged to defend against inflation might just be the very weight dragging the ship underwater faster.
It is the ultimate structural irony of the program. The automatic CLA is functioning flawlessly. It is doing exactly what the architects of 1975 designed it to do.
Yeah.
And in executing its mission perfectly, it is accelerating the system toward a fiscal cliff that forces a reckoning on the entire endeavor.
It is a devastating double-edged sword. You are getting the raise you desperately need right as the company's bank account runs dry.
That's the reality.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. As always, keep questioning the numbers behind the headlines. Look closely at how the math impacts the reality of your own planning. And we'll see you next time as we continue to unpack the stories that matter.